Welcome to the basics of biblical political theology. I'm going to be doing a series of very short videos, hopefully 5 to 7 minutes, that seek to lay the foundational principles of the relationship between God and government. Now, the goal here is that these will transcend our denominational differences, that these will really transcend the kind of pro and anti-Christian nationalism debates that are going on. The goal is really just to treat this a bit like math, the most basic principles, your addition, your subtraction, your order of operations that are necessary for more advanced discussions, more advanced debates. So I just want to lay some foundation, and therefore, also keeping the videos short, I won't be able to go into the depth that I would like to, but I think just introducing the topics and giving a survey of the topics should be really, really helpful. So the first topic that we're going to consider is man's rights, what we call human rights. And there is a logic to human rights, and we have to start with God. God alone has rights because of who he is. He has certain rights. So God has the right to be accurately represented, us being made in his image. He has the right to be represented. He has the right to be obeyed. He has the right to be loved, and he has the right to be worshiped. God's rights produce in us, those of the Imago Dei, it produces in us obligations. So we have the obligation to obey God, to represent God, to love God, to worship God. Our obligations then produce in us rights. God has the right to be obeyed, produces in us the obligation to obey, which produces in us the right to obey. Nobody can come along and prohibit us from obeying. We have a right to obey because we're obligated to obey, and we're obligated to obey because God has a right to obey. And so that, to me, really is the most basic, essential element to understanding God and government. Understanding that God alone has rights, his rights produce in us obligations, and those obligations then produce in us human rights. We can call them civil rights, human rights. And I can't get into all the rights that exist. There are quite a few, actually, but I want to look at the most basic rights. So just pulling up my notes here. If we think about the text of Scripture, and we go to Genesis 1, texts that we all know well, I'm going to read from the Legacy Standard Translation, Genesis 1, just 26 and 28. God said, "Let us make man in our image according to our likeness, so that they will have dominion over the fish of the sea, over the birds of the sky, and over the cattle, and over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creeps on the earth." God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created him. Male and female, he created them. God blessed them, said to them, "Be fruitful, multiply, fill the earth, and subdue it, and have dominion over the fish of the sea, over the birds of the sky, and over every living thing that creeps on the earth." So we get a lot of doctrines here, obviously, but as those made in God's image, we have the right to life. We could start there. We're made in the image of God. That's the reason for the death penalty in Genesis 9, that whoever takes man's life, his blood is to be shed, because we're made in the image of God. So right off the bat, because God has the right to be represented and worshiped and loved and obeyed, that produces in us an obligation to do those things. That obligation in us produces in us the human right to life. Now, that right can be forfeited, as other rights can be, but foundationally, we have the right to life. Not only do we have the right to life, we have the right to the means of life. So you think about food and sustenance and the fruit of our labors. Not only that, we were created in the image of God for a purpose. The LSB translation brings that out. Let us make man in our image, so that. And so some call this the kingdom mandate, or the cultural mandate, or the dominion mandate. But we are to fill the earth and to subdue it. And so that's kind of two prongs that we need to think about: filling and subduing. So on the filling side, there's two aspects even to that. Number one is going to be children, right? We need to be fruitful, multiply. So now we have a right to a spouse. That's a human right. We have a right to a spouse because we're obligated to fill the earth. And so not only do we have a right to a spouse, we have a right to children. And it has to be also pointed out, it's 2 or more children, because you can't fill the earth if you and your wife or you and your husband only replicate yourselves. If 2 of you come together and you only have 2 kids, then you don't fill the earth. So there's a right to two or more children. Now, man, the providence of God, that may not happen, but nobody else can come along and say, oh, no, you can only have one child. So we have the right to life, the means of life. We have the right to what we call family, right? A spouse, we have children. And then we have the right to education, educating our children, because God has a right to be obeyed and worshiped. Wherefore, we have the obligation to obey and worship Him. We have to pass that on to the children we're supposed to fill the earth with. But also, we have that cultural mandate or the creation mandate or the kingdom mandate. And so what we have there is ordered liberty. We have the right to spread out on the earth and to utilize the earth's resources in worship to God, to represent God on this earth, both in the animal kingdom and then just with the laws of nature and then the physical creation itself, the inanimate objects. So we have this right to life and the means of life and a family and education. We have a right to worship because we're obligated to worship. We have the right to worship. And then in that cultural mandate, as part of our worship, right, is this cultural mandate, this kingdom mandate, where we have the ordered liberty, and that would extend then to the arts and to the sciences. And so we can go and survey the earth. We can, as we see in Genesis 4, right, Cain's line carries out this mandate. So that's the most fundamental, foundational thing that you need to know about God and government. First off, we start with anthropology and teleology, right? What is man? What is his purpose? And the fact is, we do have human rights. We have human rights because we have obligations. We have obligations because God Himself has rights that are intrinsic to His person. So we start there. In the next video, we'll develop this just a little bit further. Hopefully that's helpful.